Hello and welcome back to G Fun Facts Online, the channel where we dive deep into the most fascinating facts our world has to offer. Today, we're talking about something you might see every day, something that shapes our landscapes and sustains life: rivers. But hold on, because these aren't just your average flowing bodies of water. Scientists are discovering that our planet's rivers are playing a secret, and surprisingly ancient, role in the global carbon cycle. Forget what you thought you knew, because we're about to uncover how rivers are unmasking carbon that's been hidden for centuries, millennia, even millions of years, and releasing it back into our atmosphere. This is a game changer for how we understand our climate. So grab your headphones and let's get flowing. For the longest time, when we thought about CO2 coming from rivers, the general idea was, okay, that's probably just from recent stuff decomposing, leaves, branches, organic bits and pieces that just fell in. Makes sense, right? But science, as it often does, is showing us a much more intricate and, frankly, mind-blowing picture. Groundbreaking research is revealing that rivers aren't just passive transporters of this young carbon from land to sea. Oh no, they're active players, and they're dealing with some seriously old carbon. So, what is this ancient carbon we're talking about? This isn't the carbon from last autumn's leaves. We're talking about carbon that's been locked away, deep underground, for an incredibly long time. Think hundreds, thousands, or even millions of years. Where does it come from? Well, there are a few major storage units. First, deep soils. Carbon can be stored in deep soil layers for centuries. Then there's what scientists call petrogenic carbon. This is carbon from weathered bedrock. Basically, as rocks break down, they can release organic carbon that was trapped inside them when they formed, potentially millions of years ago. And finally, a big one you've probably heard about: thawing permafrost. Those vast, frozen lands in the Arctic and high-altitude regions? They're packed with ancient organic carbon. As our planet warms and this permafrost thaws, that ancient carbon becomes vulnerable. Now, here's a statistic that really puts this into perspective. One major study highlighted that more than half, get this, around 60% of the CO2 released by rivers actually comes from this super old carbon that's been buried for centuries to millennia. 60%! That's not a small chunk. This discovery is fundamentally changing how we view the pathways of carbon on our planet. You might be wondering, how on earth do scientists figure out how old this carbon is? It's not like it comes with a birth certificate. Well, they have some incredibly clever cutting-edge techniques. A big one is radiocarbon dating, or carbon-14 dating. Carbon-14 is a radioactive version of carbon that decays over time, with a half-life of about 5,730 years. By measuring how much carbon-14 is left in carbon samples from river water, whether it's dissolved, particulate, or inorganic carbon, scientists can tell its age. Fresh, modern carbon has lots of carbon-14, while ancient carbon has very little, or none if it's super old, like that rock-based carbon. They also use stable carbon isotopes like carbon-13, which can give clues about where the carbon came from, like was it from land plants, or algae, or weathered rock? And it gets even cooler. Researchers are now using tracer elements. For example, an element called rhenium gets released into water when rock organic carbon reacts with oxygen. So by measuring rhenium in rivers, they can estimate CO2 release from rock weathering. To put all this data together, scientists use sophisticated isotope mixing models, sometimes with complex simulations, to figure out the contributions from all these different carbon sources: modern, old soil, ancient rock. And increasingly, they're even using machine learning training models to link the chemical signatures of carbon age with landscape features to predict carbon age in rivers across the globe. It's like high-tech detective work for carbon. Okay, so rivers are burping up ancient CO2. Why is this such a big deal? Well, it has some pretty massive implications. First, our global carbon budgets might need a rewrite. These budgets are how we track all the carbon moving around the planet. If we've been underestimating the natural CO2 emissions coming from rivers, specifically this ancient stuff, then our books aren't balanced. For instance, one study estimated that the CO2 released globally from rock organic carbon weathering is about 68 megatons of carbon per year. Now, to be clear, This is about 100 times less than current human CO2 emissions from burning fossil fuels, but it's a significant amount in Earth's natural carbon cycle, comparable to what all the world's volcanoes release. This also challenges some long-held assumptions. We used to think rivers mainly released new carbon, and that natural rock weathering was mostly a CO2 sink, meaning it absorbed CO2. But it turns out, weathering can also be a CO2 source. This is also crucial for our climate models. If these models aren't accurately accounting for this ancient carbon flux, our predictions for future atmospheric carbon levels and climate change could be off. And here's a fascinating flip side. If rivers are releasing more ancient CO2 than we thought, it implies that our land ecosystems, think plants and soils, might be even more efficient at sucking up atmospheric CO2 than we credited them for to keep the global carbon budget in balance. Some estimates suggest plants and shallow soils might be pulling down an extra gigaton of CO2 each year to counteract this newly recognized release of old carbon. Mind-boggling, right? Now, this release of ancient carbon isn't happening uniformly everywhere. There are definite hotspots. Mountain ranges are a big one, especially those with high uplift rates that expose sedimentary rocks, like the Eastern Himalayas, the Rockies, and the Andes. Even though mountain rivers and streams might seem small, they can punch way above their weight in terms of global riverine greenhouse gas emissions. And then there's permafrost regions. The Arctic is warming incredibly fast, causing widespread permafrost thaw. Permafrost stores nearly twice as much carbon as is currently in our atmosphere. As it thaws, this ancient carbon can be broken down and released as CO2 or methane. This creates a really dangerous positive feedback loop. Warming thaws permafrost, which releases greenhouse gases, which causes more warming. Peatlands are another massive carbon store. When these ancient ecosystems are disturbed, for example by drainage or burning, this long-stored carbon can be destabilized and released as CO2 from connected waterways. Research has found CO2 from such systems can be up to 1,300 years old. We can't talk about carbon in rivers without talking about the tiny invisible powerhouses, microorganisms. Bacteria and other microbes are the crucial link in what happens to this ancient carbon once it hits the water. They decompose organic carbon, young or old, releasing CO2 through respiration. And here's something surprising. Studies have shown that aquatic microbes can chow down on soil organic carbon, even the old stuff, much faster than soil microbes can. It's like they're super efficient recyclers. Sometimes, the presence of fresh, easy-to-digest organic matter can even kickstart the breakdown of older, tougher carbon, a phenomenon called the priming effect. It's complex, but these tiny organisms have a huge impact on whether that ancient carbon gets quickly released or not. So this discovery of ancient carbon leaking from our rivers really forces us to think. While it's a natural process, human activities could be making it worse. Things like land use changes, building dams, and of course climate-induced warming, especially in those permafrost regions, can mess with water cycles, erosion, and microbial activity. This could potentially speed up the release of ancient carbon. Understanding these fluxes is absolutely essential for sharpening our climate projections. If we don't account for these emissions, we might be underestimating future CO2 levels. This also has big implications for conservation. For areas rich in ancient carbon, like permafrost landscapes and peatlands, protecting them from disturbance becomes even more critical to keep that carbon locked away. This field of research is moving fast, but there are still challenges. Accurately measuring these carbon fluxes across all the diverse river systems globally is tough. We need more data from many regions. Also, while we know ancient carbon is being released, the exact nitty-gritty details, the precise mechanisms, rates, and what controls them still need more investigation. It's also tricky to perfectly distinguish CO2 coming from modern plants versus old soil versus super ancient rock within the same river. So, what's next? The big push is to build a global river observation system. This means more widespread, consistent measurements, including those fancy isotope analyses we talked about, and then plugging all that data into advanced models to get a clearer picture. The unmasking of ancient carbon as a significant CO2 source from our global waterways truly makes us see rivers in a new light. They're not just passive pipes carrying water to the sea. They are dynamic biogeochemical reactors, actively processing carbon from all sorts of sources and of all sorts of ages. As we continue to piece together the giant puzzle of Earth's carbon cycle, understanding the journey of this ancient carbon, from its long-term hiding places to its re-entry into our atmosphere, is absolutely vital if we want to navigate our way to a stable climate future. It's another powerful reminder of how interconnected everything is: geology, ecology, and the atmosphere. And it really underscores the urgent need to protect those vulnerable, carbon-rich landscapes. That's all for this episode of G Fun Facts Online. I hope this gave you a new appreciation for the humble river. Join us next time for more amazing science facts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you found this fascinating. Until then, keep exploring.